Good afternoon. My name is John Luby, and I'm one of the application engineers with fmSystems. Today we'll be focusing on the facility maintenance application inside the FM Interact suite. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the GoToWebinar panel on your right side. We'll do our best to make sure that we get those answered in a timely fashion. This webinar should last roughly 20 minutes, but if you have any other questions, again, we can certainly extend it and show any pieces of the facility maintenance that you'd like to see. So we're going to go ahead and get started. What you're looking at on the screen is FM Interact version 8. It's an entirely browser-based system, and it does build on top of the FM Interact suite of products. So there are a couple of key components. FM Interact is entirely permission-based. That means users belong to groups, and those groups are granted permissions to do things and see things in the application. As we start going through the system today, you'll see me log in and log out as different users, but just keep in mind that that can be integrated with a single sign-on approach as well. So if you're using things like Active Directory to manage your permissions, you can certainly incorporate that into FM Interact as well. The core application consists of space management, strategic planning, asset management, and all of the administrative tools that correspond to the system. All of the additional modules bolt on top of that FM Interact core application. So move management, facility maintenance, real estate and portfolio, project management, and sustainability all build on top of the FM Interact core application. Today we'll be focused mostly on the facility maintenance suite. Let's go ahead and start taking a look at some of the functionality in the system. One of the biggest things for a lot of organizations is to be able to track where things are and how they might be able to navigate to information. A lot of our clientele will use some sort of a graphical approach to ultimately be able to pull up a floor plan, maybe even zoom in, and maybe even pick up information about those spaces. The way that we work with all of our assets is we break them down into categories, so you'll see different categories listed when we look at the maintenance piece today too. So it might be things like office equipment or IT equipment, or furniture, or even building equipment. We'll focus on some of the building equipment items today. One of the key ingredients in any solution is to try and provide a means of accessing data from wherever you are. So whether you're looking at a graphic and you want to be able to find that particular item in it, or maybe you're brand new to the system and you're trying to locate a particular item. An example that I like to use is, let's say I'm a maintenance technician. And in my world, I'm thinking about the equipment that I need to be able to manage. Maybe I've been told I need to go and locate a particular air handler. Well, I like using this as an example because I'm going to purposely be vague and use our search capabilities in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to type in AIR and click Find. What that's actually doing is going through the entire database and finding any records that might have a spatial location, meaning they could reside within a space or potentially be placed in a space. What you'll notice is that the result set found 583 records, so quite a few items that match that criteria. The idea is that it's going to output a list of 5 of those items If we want to drill down into more specifics, we can certainly do so. But again, it's a browser-operated system. You can use back buttons and get to that type of information. Now, this technician was looking for an air handler, but you'll notice it found AIR as part of a space type, AIR as part of a person's name. But because of the way that we've configured the system here, we're not outputting the description that that individual might be looking for, because maybe we've asked our technicians to use asset tags. So the system can still go and find that item and locate where it is based upon that description. In this case, it's letting us know what's the make, the model number of this item. When did we place it into service? What kind of warranty is remaining on it? But also even getting down to the level of saying, who did we purchase this from? How do we contact them? And maybe even the service history associated with this item. So there are lots of different ways to access data. This is just one way in which we might search for a particular item. Let's get into some of the meat and potatoes of the facility maintenance component, though. Facility maintenance really looks at two key ingredients. We look at demand work orders and preventative work orders, and we'll take a look at both during this demonstration. Let's assume that we're in a situation where we need to go out and fill out a form that says, hey, I've got a particular problem. Some organizations will have multiple forms for different types of information. Others will just simply break it down by categories and activities. But you might allow everybody in your organization to submit a request. The system knows who we are based upon our login, but if we need to, we can even change which space is a problem, maybe do that from a graphical approach where we can say, well, it's not really the space that I'm in, it's this supply area. And again, we can populate the data with that. If we need to, we can choose a category. These are completely up to you, and you're able to control how they work together. So for example, if it's an electrical issue, we might have a couple of common activities, or issues as you might call them. If it's an HVAC system issue, we might see a different subset of lists. So what we can do is we can go in and track this and say the supply closet is freezing. When we're filling out the form, we're just simply doing that. We're listing information that needs to be tackled. However, when we click Submit, a number of actions are occurring. So not only did it output to the database, but it might have also actually output an email notification. In our case, we've got email notifications being sent out to the building supervisor for that particular location. You'll notice that we can format these emails however we wish, and we can decide who gets the email and how we want to have that information presented. Behind the scenes of the entire FM Interact application is a notification engine that can send out either emails or even SMS text notifications. You might have multiple notifications sent out at one time. So for example, Robert Talley might get an email that says when this item was submitted, who it was for, and maybe what the priority automatically is for the item. However, the person who submitted it might simply get an email that says, we have received your request. Completely up to you and how you configure your system to track that. In our case, the building supervisor, Robert Talley, just got an email notification letting him know that he needs to go ahead and track some of his maintenance operations. You'll notice that his dashboard is very different than John Bryant's, because the things that matter to Robert are more associated with the facilities that he might manage. When we're looking at information from the facility maintenance piece, just like everything else inside FM Interact, we can have reports and documents and views of this information. When we want to see all of the service items that we might be looking at, we can see everything that's been submitted that is associated with our credentials. So in this case, Robert sees 75 different items. You can see John Bryant is kind of my complainer, but everything is color-coded to allow me to keep track of what items have been submitted. The system can even automatically assign different color coding and status based upon the type of activity. So for example, when we were working with that particular item, an HVAC item might automatically get placed into an in-progress status. However, if it's an electrical issue, maybe that automatically goes to a pending status. You have complete control over the color coding as well as how that operation functions. In our case, we are working with a particular issue. We might have an item that was just submitted, and we might need to change, for example, the priority and go ahead and just save that, update the system with that information. We might want to take that a little bit further and maybe fill out more details, or as in our example here, we're going to dispatch it to one of our technicians to take a look. I'm going to go ahead and assign this to Doug Hod and say, please take a look. When I add Doug to that list, Doug might have just gotten an email notification letting him know that something has been added to his plate. So I'll go ahead and sign out as Robert, and I'll sign in as Doug Hod. Again, Doug is one of our technicians. You'll notice that his view of the world is very different. It only includes the things in which Doug needs to keep track. You'll notice his list only shows 10 items. It's only going to show him the items in which he is one of the assignees. So it allows for the technicians to see only the pieces that they need to see. Now, Doug might be coming in here, keeping track of his particular service breakout, and he might say that my tasks have been completed and it took me 2.5 hours. Typically, you're not going to show your technicians the costs associated with it, but we show that here so that you can see the dynamic nature of the product. If you want to use hourly rates or internal billing rates, you can go ahead and have those calculated automatically. As he saves this, again, email notifications might have been sent out, but the color coding is going to change and information is being updated in the system. So that might go back to Robert Talley for him to close out the actual work order. Completely up to you what your approach is on the product. Let's go ahead and look at something a little bit different, though. What if we're trying to keep track of information, but it's more preventative in nature? One of the things that we might want to do is track all of the preventative maintenance items. When we're looking at perhaps an air handler, we might know that, hey, on a yearly basis, we need to perform some tasks on this air handler. Well, what are those tasks? How long does it normally take us? What does it typically cost? and we can see that information very quickly. In addition, throughout the entire application, we can attach documents. Documents in our system are really electronic files. So a document might be something like a Word doc, a PDF file, an Excel spreadsheet. So what that allows us to do is keep track of important documents. For example, maybe we need to see what the wiring harness looks like, or maybe get a schematic, maybe even warranty information, and have that at our fingertips in a digital manner. So very quickly we can pull up that information and not have to worry about where it resides. Obviously, with all of these items, if you've got more information, you get to decide how you want to display it, how many fields of data we want to keep track of, and what manner works best for us. But what that really turns into is now we can start looking at information to almost anything in the system. So we might want to see, what do we have for open work orders? Or maybe we'd like to break those down by specific activities. Always seems that we've got just as many too hots as we do too colds. Maybe one side of the building gets too hot, another gets too cold. Or we can even look at them based upon individual service centers and be able to get some idea of what do we have for items within our maintenance department, or maybe even some of the IT groups. Diving in and taking a look in a little bit more of a graphical fashion, we might want to see things like, what do we have for open work orders by technician? Who has the most workload right now? What exactly is in their workload? Maybe we want to filter it down, take a look at exactly everything that's on Doug's plate. If we want to get an idea of what we have for completed items, same type of thing. Plenty of different reports for almost anything in the system. Some of the ones that we see getting used a little bit more are things associated with building equipment. Maybe we need to be able to look at what's the asset ID of the item, maybe even have a picture of it, but now we need to take a look at the life cycle costs. So when our repair costs start exceeding our preventative maintenance costs, maybe we now know it's time to start looking at replacing this particular piece of equipment. We can get to all the level of detail in this particular report that we might need to see. When was it installed? When's the warranty run out? What do we have for currently open or closed work orders? Or maybe even a link to go and create a new work order on that item. So lots of different variables, lots of different ways to look at information in the system. And again, it's designed to have that information at your fingertips. A lot of organizations really want to be able to track service level agreements. As part of a maintenance operation, you might then send out a satisfaction survey to keep track of how good of a job are we doing. Are we hitting the things that we want to be able to see? Are we giving you the professional results that you were hoping for? So at this point in time, I'll take a break and see if there are any questions that we might need to have answered. So if you've got any questions, please enter them into the question panel of the GoToWebinar. So we do have a question right now. There's a question, is there a way to attach a document to a work order? Right now, the way that our configuration here is being displayed is it's showing more associated with the preventative side. But absolutely, if you wanted to attach a document, typically what we would recommend is attaching a link to that document location. because multiple work orders might want to be able to access that particular one as well. There's a question, are we working with a BIM file? Absolutely can be if we wanted to. So in our case, the graphics that we're looking at on the screen in this particular graphic, I'll go ahead and pull one up. This particular one is coming from an AutoCAD drawing, but we do have a couple of others that are coming from Revit files because we really can work in either arrangement, is whether it's inside Revit or inside AutoCAD, we can still get to that information and see that level of detail. And actually, I'll open up Revit because that might help here as well. We'll go ahead and take a look at that. Is there a way to search for work orders by keywords? So depending upon how you configure the system, you might have different data views that might show that information. In our case, when we're working with data views, we might see all sorts of different pieces of information. We might have it based upon the status of an item and be able to look at the work orders associated with it, but you can very easily have it so that anything that you want to be able to look at, you can even drill down into the history associated with it, maybe filter for a particular item, or even do a search for just a particular item. So whichever works best for you, you can absolutely get to that. The platforms for Revit that we work with, right now we work through the AutoCAD and Revit 2013 products. The one I think I'm demonstrating here is 2011. But just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, when we look inside Revit, what we're really looking at is Revit keeps track of type and instance parameters associated with assets or things that we might want to be able to manage. So if you want to utilize Revit, you absolutely can. There are lots of pieces that we can work with there. Let's say the manufacturer and the model number are coming from Revit. Well, as this information starts changing, we might say FMS boiler, just so that we can really see the difference. I can make that modification, but because we've got a bolt-in to the FM Interact application, all I need to do is click a button that says, hey, I just modified an asset in Revit. Let me go ahead and update that in FM Interact. And now if I'm looking at that particular site, and I'm looking at the graphic for it, what I might be able to do is maybe we're drilling down into it. We're trying to get some idea of what it is. You'll notice that my manufacturer has been updated as well. And that's bidirectional in the system. Is this Navisworks? This is not Navisworks. What you're looking at in here is FM Interact. It currently uses the Autodesk Design Review tool for the graphic viewer here, but you can also incorporate PDF. We can publish to both PDF or DWF, which is what we're looking at here. And it can also, in the future, it'll be utilizing HTML5. So a lot more powerful features even coming in the future. So good question. Can monthly, 6-month, or even irregular preventative maintenance dates be prepared and maybe even sent out to external contractors? And yes, absolutely. What we look at is how do you want to notify them? So if you want to give them an email notification, that's fine, or a report, or maybe you want to give them access to the system. So completely up to you, but yes, you can schedule those tasks in regular or even irregular approaches and then decide how they get routed. Yeah, there are quite a few pieces that we get mapped from Revit. So inside Revit, when we're looking at the assets, we use a tool that allows us to decide how we want to configure those assets. So Revit has lots and lots of different families of things that we might want to track. In this case, maybe we're working with a boiler, and you'll notice on the left-hand side, these are the type and instance parameters that Revit tracks. What we've done is we've mapped those to fields in the fmInteract database. So we happen to have a field for the manufacturer, probably a good place to store that. We have a field for the model, probably a good place to store that. And you'll also notice that there's an option here that says, is Revit the authoritative source for that? So in other words, if we change that in Revit, do I want that to control who the manufacturer of the model is? Now when we get down to the instance parameters, we're looking at a little bit more information. So we might have 20 of this same boiler. Well, maybe those comments field, we're going to map those to a description field, and we're going to allow fmInteract to maintain those updates. So there's a whole mapping template that you can create that allows you to track what gets stored and how we want to see that information. Let's see. Can you use Navisworks or CADpipe or 3D CAD instead of Revit? Right now, we are obviously focused on the integration with the Autodesk tools for Revit and AutoCAD. And yes, they are bidirectional. So information can be extracted from fmInteract and pushed right back to Revit, and vice versa. Is there the ability to bring in live data? Yes. So this is a real good question, and this brings up a great item, is let's say we've got a system that tracks all of our sensor data. So we've got an alarm that goes off, and that needs to trigger an event in the system. What this can absolutely do is we can update the database. Requires a little bit of configuration to say what do we want to occur at a given point in time, but it can update the system so that you might even see that graphically inside fmInteract as to where the alarm is that's going off. So maybe we've got a basement that's flooded and we're trying to keep track of that, or maybe in the server room it overheated and we need to keep track of that. So information absolutely can be tracked and synchronized with any ODBC compliant data source. So if that external system is ODBC compliant, Open Database Connectivity compliant, we can link to that system if you're given permission to do so, and either live or on a nightly basis, some regular basis, go and grab the latest and greatest information and update the database with that information. We standardize on SQL Server or Oracle, so depending upon your database platform of choice, we work with both. So lots of great questions. If anybody else has any other questions, by all means, you can stay on the line, and I'll do my best to answer them. But I do see that we're running up against the clock, so I certainly understand if you need to drop off. How fast can the refresh be to the sensors of the alarm? It's instantaneous. So depending upon what you do and how you want to see that information being updated in the system, completely up to you how you want to visualize it. So once it's in the database, it's instant. Everything that we are doing throughout fmInteract is hitting that data live. So the example was when we changed something in fmInteract, we changed it to a boiler. All we had to do was publish that information from Revit, to put it into the database. But when we're working with the system, we're hitting that data live instantly. So again, I really appreciate everyone's attendance today. If there are any other questions, by all means, let me know, and I'll be glad to stay on here. So yeah, there's another question about updating the model from this. So let's go ahead and look at that exact example. So we were working with a particular boiler here. Well, maybe one of our items that we're trying to keep track of, we know that maybe there's a piece of building equipment that we're working with, and maybe we're just trying to get some idea of what's going on with that item. Well, you'll notice different fields of data in here might have different pieces of information that are getting mapped back to FM Interact or into that Revit model. So let's do the same thing that we were looking at there before, and only this time we'll push it back in the other direction. So inside Revit, when we were looking at this item, you'll notice that we had a few different fields of data. Those fields are going to be able to track that information, but let's say that comments field is one that we want to be able to map. We want to have information that goes back there. Well, depending upon what field we map to, we could actually go ahead and add that to the system. So let's do this. Let's see if we can configure that particular asset to include something a little bit more powerful to see here. Let's say we're going to go and map it to the description. So I'm going to save that. And now what I'm going to try and do is, with that information being saved in the system, we know that that's what our template is going to work with. We can then very quickly just click on that information, display it, and now what we're looking at is there's our comment. Well, let's go ahead and change something in here. So we're not going to call it a boiler. We're going to say problem boiler. Go ahead and save that in here. Same thing that I might do now is inside my Revit component. I might go ahead and say, you know what, let's go ahead and update those pieces of information and go ahead and display those changes. So it's bidirectional. It makes no difference which one is tracking that information. But lots of great questions today. I really appreciate everyone's attendance, and hopefully you can come and see any of these in the future as well. Question, do you need to learn AutoCAD or Revit to use the product? Absolutely not. 90+% of our users of the FM Interact application don't even realize they're using a product to begin with, because the system will be configured to look and feel and act like your organization wants to see it. So a couple of quick things just so that you can get an idea. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, they wanted their people to navigate down to information from a map. But their upper-level management team, they wanted them to have a dashboard that showed them everything going on in their facility at any given point in time. But what you'll notice is that depending upon who the user is, you'll notice the service request forms look different. There's not even any fmSystems banner information being displayed. It can look and feel and act however you wish to see that information. So absolutely you can do that. Yeah, so as far as my contact information, let me just give you this. So my direct email is jluby, J-L-U-B-Y, @fmsystems.com. And if you've got any questions, by all means, send them to me. If I don't have the answer for you, I'm sure I can get you into the capable hands of somebody who might. But thank you very much, everyone, and I think that we'll conclude this demonstration at this time.